Have you ever wondered just how far humanity can fall? Well, spoiler alert, pretty far. I'm not talking about the big tragedies from history class. No, this is the kind of stuff that'll make your stomach drop and your faith in humanity head for the door. From bombs stuffed into barrels, rolled out of helicopters and unleashed on schools and hospitals, to teens being abused at troubled teen programs, and let's not forget the horrifying world of illegal organ trading. It's dark, it's heavy, but it's real. And sadly, there's more where that came from. I'm Mike with List 25, and here are 25 depressing facts that'll make you question humanity. 25. The ongoing Rohingya crisis in Myanmar. In August 2017, Myanmar's Rakhine state was hit by waves of violence and armed attacks, forcing hundreds of thousands of Rohingya people, the Muslim minority group, to flee. Families left their homes and walked for days through dense jungles or risked their lives crossing the Bay of Bengal on rickety boats. Today, nearly 1 million Rohingya refugees have found relatives safely in Bangladesh, with most living in the Cox's Bazar region, home to the world's largest refugee camp. Life in the camps is far from easy, though. Overcrowding, lack of resources, and the constant threat of disease make daily survival a challenge. The United Nations has called the Rohingya the most persecuted minority in the world, and yet, despite years of global outcry, the world has done just about nothing to stop the suffering. 24. The Ghost Fleet of Thailand. Thousands of trafficked workers from Myanmar and Cambodia have been forced into modern slavery in Thailand. These men are trapped on ghost fleet boats that rarely dock, sometimes staying at sea for years. These men are forced to work under horrific conditions, facing violence, starvation, and grueling hours with no escape. And here's the part that should make us all uncomfortable. The seafood they catch ends up in supermarkets around the world. It's a supply chain powered by modern-day slavery, and most of us have no idea we're supporting it. There are organizations trying to fight this, but the reality is bleak. The fact of the matter is that people want their fish, no matter the true cost. 23. The Uyghur women's forced sterilizations. The Uyghur people, a Muslim minority group in China's Xinjiang province, have faced years of systemic oppression. Reports have described mass surveillance, forced labor, detention in so-called re-education camps, and the destruction of their cultural and religious heritage. But one of the most horrific allegations is the forced sterilization of Uyghur women. Leaked documents and survivor accounts reveal that women have been subjected to forced abortions and sterilizations as part of a government effort to suppress the Uyghur population. These are women being stripped of their choices, their futures, and their rights. It's a gross violation of human rights and a terrible reminder that no matter who or where you are, if your government comes for you, there will be little intervention from the rest of the world. 22. The Flint water crisis. In 2014, Flint, Michigan switched its water source to the Flint River to save money. What followed was nothing short of a public health disaster. The river's corrosive water caused lead to filter through from aging pipes, poisoning thousands of residents, including young children. Officials brushed off complaints about the water's taste, smell, and color until independent studies confirmed dangerous levels of lead in children's blood, and the crisis finally gained national attention. A $226 million settlement was approved in 2021 to compensate those affected, but for many, the damage was already done. Lead poisoning doesn't just go away. Residents, especially children, face long-term health effects like developmental delays, learning disabilities, and other chronic health issues. Whether it was environmental racism or just good old greed, it's hard to wrap your head around the fact that this happened in the developed world, and within the last decade, no less. 21. Pink tax and women's product pricing. It might not be violent, but the pink tax is a frustrating example of everyday discrimination. Studies have shown that women's products like razors, deodorant, and shampoo often cost more than men's versions, even when they're nearly identical in every possible way. And it's all about marketing. Companies slap a pink label or floral scent on something and charge women more simply because they can. And while each price difference might seem small, it adds up fast. Over a year, women can end up paying thousands more for the same essentials. It's a perfect example of gendered stereotypes being exploited for profit. And the worst part? Most people don't even realize they're being duped. 20. Fast fashion's environmental and human cost. Fast fashion might give us affordable, trendy clothes, but the real cost is staggering. And it's not just about money. In countries like Bangladesh and India, the people making these clothes are paid shockingly low wages and work in unsafe conditions. Long hours are the norm, and child labor is far too common. And that's just the human side of the problem. The environmental side isn't any better. Fast fashion pumps out mountains of cheap clothing, most of which gets tossed into landfills or burned. Those discarded clothes release harmful chemicals while the production process pollutes rivers, soils, and the air we breathe. It's a system built on exploitation of people, resources, and the planet, all to keep up with our endless appetite for the latest trends. 19. The child miners in the DRC. Cobalt has been called the new blood diamond. It's a highly valuable mineral that powers the lithium batteries in everything from phones to laptops to electric cars. Most of the world's cobalt, over 70%, comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and it's no secret how it's mined. Children as young as 6 are sent to these dangerous mines where they risk fatal accidents every single day. The conditions are horrifying. The children have no safety gear, no protection, and dig by hand in toxic, unstable pits that collapse without warning. And here's the worst part. As the world shifts to renewable energy to fight climate change, the demand, not to mention the price, for cobalt has skyrocketed. Even though it's more valuable than ever, the people mining are still being exploited and there's nothing they can do about it. 18. The conversion therapy industry. Imagine being told that a core part of who you are needs to be fixed. That's the reality for hundreds of thousands of LGBTQ+ youth who are subjected to conversion therapy every year. Despite being wildly discredited, this practice, ranging from psychological abuse to methods as extreme as electroshock therapy, still happens in far too many places around the world. A recent study published in JAMA Pediatrics revealed just how devastating the so-called therapy really is. Beyond the $650 million spent annually on conversion therapy in the US, the associated harms like substance abuse, depression, anxiety, and even suicide attempts cost the country an additional $8.58 billion each year. That is $9.23 billion in human suffering wrapped in a cruel facade of help. And the personal toll is immeasurable. Survivors report lasting trauma, mental health struggles, and a sense of betrayal that cuts deep. For most, the damage lasts a lifetime. 17. Big Pharma prioritizes profits. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the world's 20 biggest pharmaceutical companies handed out over $1 million to shareholders and executives every 5 minutes. Think about that. Every 5 minutes. In fact, some companies spend more on dividends and buybacks than on research. Over 3 years, Big Pharma made $455 billion in profits, with vaccine makers like Moderna and BioNTech pulling in profit margins of over 50%. And while the industry doubled its earnings, many low-income countries struggled to access life-saving vaccines because the companies refused to share medical technology. According to them, giving up control of patents would hurt innovation, a claim that's been called a political myth by experts like former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. The numbers don't lie. This isn't about innovation. It's about keeping a monopoly and making as much money as possible. From overpriced insulin to withheld vaccine patents, Big Pharma keeps proving one thing. When profits come first, people will always come second. And look, I know it's not the right terminology, but if you're enjoying this video, you know what I mean. If you could like, share, comment, and subscribe, it helps us bring more stuff to you. And I would appreciate that. I know, this is it's not an enjoyable list, but it still helps our channel grow, so I would appreciate it. Back to the list. 16. China's cancer villages. In China, some villages have seen so many cancer cases that they've been given the heartbreaking name cancer villages. By 2017, at least 462 of these villages were identified across 226 counties, most of them clustered near major rivers like the Yangtze. The connection is undeniable: industrial pollution. Factories release heavy materials and toxic chemicals, including PFAS or forever chemicals that don't break down in the environment. These toxins contaminate the water and soil, leading to higher cancer rates and devastating entire communities. The government was initially slow to acknowledge the existence of these cancer villages, and while awareness has grown, the pollution continues, with efforts focused on reducing it rather than stopping it entirely. 15. The impact of wildlife trafficking. Wildlife trafficking is devastating, and it's not just the animals that are paying the price. It's all of us and the planet too. The demand for exotic pets, traditional medicine, and luxury goods is pushing species like elephants and sharks closer to extinction. Coral reefs are being destroyed by practices like cyanide fishing, leaving entire ecosystems in ruins. And the ripple effects are hard to ignore. Collapsing ecosystems mean rural communities lose their livelihoods, and diseases like Ebola, they can spread when humans come into close contact with trafficked animals. Meanwhile, organized crime thrives, feeding off the high profits and global demand. It's a lose-lose situation, and we're stuck in it. 14. The continued deforestation of the Amazon. Deforestation, fires, and degradation have already destroyed 17% of the Amazon, with another 17% severely damaged. If this trend continues, the Amazon could reach a tipping point, and we could enter a time where we've done irreversible damage to the region and to the planet. The Amazon is home to 47 million people, including 2.2 million indigenous individuals from over 500 groups, and it holds almost 10% of the world's biodiversity, regulates global climate, and produces 20% of the fresh water flowing into Earth's oceans. In fact, if it wasn't for the Amazon's flying rivers, there wouldn't be enough moisture to create rainfall for agriculture across South America. Despite international concern, deforestation driven by agriculture, logging, and mining continues to surge, putting the entire ecosystem and our future at risk. 13. Barrel bombs in Syria. Barrel bombs, oil-stuffed drums with explosives and shrapnel, are one of the most horrifying weapons of the Syrian civil war. Dropped from helicopters with no specific target, they hit homes, schools, and hospitals. By 2021, these bombs had already killed 11,000 civilians. 2,000 of those were children. For those who survive, the impact goes far beyond the explosions. These bombs empty entire neighborhoods, forcing families to flee and leaving communities in ruins. And while the world has condemned the Assad regime for using them, nothing has stopped the attacks. It's hard to wrap your head around how something so crude can cause so much destruction, and how the regime can use it against its own people. 12. The atrocities of the palm oil industry. Palm oil is everywhere. It's in nearly half of all packaged products on store shelves, from your snacks to soaps to makeup and even pet food. Unfortunately, behind the glossy products on the store shelves are stories of displaced indigenous communities, children forced into brutal labor, and forests destroyed at an unimaginable scale. And some of our biggest brands have a finger in the pie. A recent investigation found out that PepsiCo has ties to deforestation on indigenous lands in Peru. Although they claim to source palm oil ethically, deforested palm oil still finds its way into their supply chain, hidden by murky storage procedures. One supplier alone is linked to more than 155 square kilometers of forest loss in just the past decade. The impact is staggering. Biodiversity gets wiped out, lives are uprooted, and climate change is accelerated. All for a cheap ingredient found in everything from snacks to cosmetics. 11. The troubled teen industry's abuse of minors. The troubled teen industry, those so-called therapeutic boarding schools and wilderness camps, claims to help kids turn their lives around. But behind the promises are some horrifying realities. Survivors have shared stories of forced labor, physical abuse, isolation, and emotional trauma. Paris Hilton even spoke out against Provo Canyon School, where she says she endured abuse, putting a much-needed spotlight on this billion-dollar industry that operates with little oversight. For an industry that claims to help, it's heartbreaking to see vulnerable teens, many already dealing with serious challenges, face even more abuse. And for parents, who are often desperate to help their kids and have no other options, paying for that harm feels like the ultimate betrayal. 10. The Kafala system in the Middle East. The Kafala system is a sponsorship program for migrant workers in countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, but it's been called modern-day slavery for a reason. Workers, mostly from South Asia and Africa, are often brought over on their employer's dime, only to have their passports confiscated upon arrival. Employers claim it's to ensure the workers repay their debts, but with wages so low, it's nearly impossible to break free. For many, it's a trap they can't escape. Worse, some workers are lured under the promise of domestic jobs, only to find themselves trafficked into sex work or other exploitative situations. The Kafala system has turned vulnerable people into commodities, and they are completely powerless against abusive employers. 9. The tragedy of child marriages. Child marriage, where children under 18 are married off, is a harsh reality for millions of people worldwide. About 650 million women and girls alive today were married as children, and 12 million more added to that number every year. That's 23 girls every minute. Yes, every minute. The consequences are devastating. Early pregnancies put their health and lives at risk. Education is often cut short, and economic opportunities vanish, perpetuating cycles of poverty. At the current going rate, 150 million more girls will become child brides by 2030. 8. The ongoing Yemen crisis. The civil war in Yemen has been raging for years, turning the country into one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. Fueled by a proxy conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the violence has devastated millions of lives. Airstrikes, blockades, and famine have left over 20 million Yemenis in desperate need of aid, and the children are suffering the most. Despite the global attention the crisis has received, little has changed. Families continue to endure unimaginable hardship while the world looks on with no real resolution in sight. 7. The illegal organ trade. The black market for organs preys on the world's most vulnerable. In developing countries, desperate individuals are often coerced into selling their organs under false promises, only to face exploitation and abuse. Even more disturbing, victims of human trafficking, including children, are killed so their kidneys, livers, and other organs can be sold to the highest bidder. Once dismissed as an urban legend, child organ trafficking is now a confirmed and horrifying reality. The Pavesi case in Brazil is one example, where a 10-year-old boy was declared brain dead under suspicious circumstances, and his organs were illegally harvested and sold. Several doctors were later charged in connection with the crime. It's a dark and lucrative market fueled by exploitation and tragedy that far exceeds the supply of available organs. 6. The global orphanage tourism industry. In countries like Cambodia and Nepal, orphanages have become a shocking business, exploiting children for profit. Many of these so-called orphans actually have living parents but are actively recruited to attract donations and tourists. Hopeful adoptive parents and well-meaning volunteers donate their time and money, believing they're making a difference. But the reality is far more heartbreaking. These children often endure neglect and abuse, while the funds meant for their childcare end up in the pockets of corrupt operators. It's not about helping kids, it's about profiting from their suffering. This industry preys on good intentions, turning vulnerable children into commodities for donations and Instagram photos. 5. The Anti-LGBTQ Agendas. It might be hard to believe, but in 2024, being LGBTQ+ is still considered a crime in 64 countries around the world. In some places, in fact, like Iran and Saudi Arabia, same-sex relationships can even end with the death penalty. At the same time, countries like Ghana are passing stricter anti-LGBTQ+ laws, making it illegal to even identify as LGBTQ+. It's unsettling to see some parts of the world making strides in acceptance while others seem determined to cling to discrimination. The saddest thing is that these laws don't help anyone. All they do is divide us. Why can't we just let people love who they want to? Isn't love better than hate? 4. The dolphin slaughter in Taiji, Japan. If you've never heard of the dolphin slaughter in Taiji, Japan, well, consider yourself lucky. The documentary The Cove brought global attention to this brutal practice, and if you haven't seen it, be warned. It's heartbreaking. Then again, maybe everyone should see it, because this horror won't stop unless we take action. Every year, fishermen herd hundreds of dolphins into a small cove. There, the dolphins are either slaughtered for their meat or captured and sold to aquariums. The meat itself is often mislabeled and sold despite containing high levels of mercury, while the marine entertainment industry profits from live dolphin sales. The Cove exposed a painful truth. We've prioritized entertainment and profit over the lives of sentient creatures. Maybe it's time we asked ourselves what kind of world we want to live in. 3. The forced evictions of the San people. The San people, also known as the Bushmen, are believed to be the first people of the world. Their DNA is some of the most diverse ever studied, directly linking them to the earliest branches of modern humans. As the original inhabitants of southern Africa, they've lived peacefully in harmony with the Kalahari Desert for more than 20,000 years. But today, they've been pushed off their ancestral lands across almost every sub-Saharan country. In Botswana, their evictions from the Central Kalahari Game Reserve are especially devastating. These removals, often to make way for diamond mining, prioritize profit over the rights of Africa's first people. Even though courts have ruled in favor of the San's land rights, governments and corporations continue to ignore them. A peaceful and ancient community already vulnerable now faces the threat of cultural and physical extinction, all in the name of greed. 2. The online child exploitation industry. The internet has brought so much good into the world, but it's also opened up the door to unimaginable harm. In 2022 alone, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received over 32 million reports of suspected child exploitation. While law enforcement is fighting hard, Homeland Security investigations made over 3,700 arrests in a single year, the scale of the problem is staggering. For every predator caught, millions more continue to exploit vulnerable children. It's impossible to remove all this harmful content from the internet, and keeping kids safe feels like a losing battle. Sophisticated predators are using the latest technology to evade detection, and many platforms simply can't keep up. Meanwhile, the images and videos remain online, causing victims to relive their trauma over and over again. 1. The banality of evil. The Holocaust is one of history's most horrifying events, no question about it. But what's often overlooked is the role ordinary people, clerks, nurses, train operators, guards, played in making it possible. German-American historian Hannah Arendt called this the banality of evil, explaining how people, by just doing their jobs, became part of something unspeakable. And here's the thing, this concept isn't just about the past, it's painfully relevant today. The banality of evil shows up anywhere people prioritize obedience, profit, or convenience over basic humanity. Basically, like this whole video so far. It happens in workplaces, schools, governments, and anywhere decisions are made without asking, is this right? Think about it. How often do we see discrimination, cruelty, or corruption and just stay quiet? How often do we let things slide, telling ourselves, it's not my responsibility? The Holocaust is a stark reminder of where that kind of thinking can lead, but the warning applies to everything we do today. Evil isn't always dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it's as simple as going along with the flow, even when you know it's wrong. And that's it for today. I know, this one was a lot to take in, but if you made it this far, thank you so much for sticking with me. And normally I'd suggest another video here, but today I'm going to tell you about my new channel, Dark Roast Detectives. And if you're into true crime and unraveling some of the darkest mysteries out there, you'll want to check it out. I deep dive into cases that leave you questioning everything. So if you're ready for more, hit the link and join me there. And if you're just sticking around here, no worries, and I'll see you in the next one.